Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and a very special welcome if you're new. My name is Shelly, the owner and creator of the Vintage Hen and Chick, and in today's video we are going to be doing 3 simple and fun thrift flips. So if you enjoy trash to treasure upcycles, thrift flips, furniture flips, or crafting in general, then you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and that way you'll get notified when I upload a new video. Now let's get started. For project 1 is this primitive sheep. And when I say I've had this in my collection for a long time, I am serious. And this little guy is filthy and he's outdated and he just needs a makeover. So the first thing I'm gonna do is gonna clean him up. I'm gonna get rid of all those ratty looking pip berries. I'm gonna cut the ribbon off around his neck. It's all faded and frayed, and I'm gonna pop that little tin star off on the body. So I'm gonna take my screwdriver and pry up the staples that had these pip berries secured. I'm gonna get those all off, and then once I get them off, I'm going to spray this down thoroughly with my Dixie Belle White Lightning and clean it. It's grimy and it's dirty and it needs a really good cleaning. And then once I clean it good with the White Lightning, then I'm going to come back and spritz it just with some clean water with my Mister bottle to get everything completely off. So I'm going to continue to clean this little guy, and then once he's all clean, then we'll move on to the next step. So he's all clean, and I wanted to paint the base. I'm not a fan of the red and black checkerboard, so I thought it'd be easiest just to take the wheels off before I paint it. So I'm just gonna take my screwdriver, take these wheels off, set them aside, and that way it's gonna make painting the base a lot easier. So our little sheep is all clean and ready for its paint job. And I wanted to use milk paint on the body of this sheep. And for this, I am going to use the brand new Bespoke Collection by Jamie Ray Vintage in the color Hollandaise. And if you're not familiar with milk paint is powder, and you mix it equal parts powder to water. So I just mixed it up for a couple of minutes, and then I like to set mine aside for about 10 minutes to let it thicken up a little bit. You want your milk paint to be the consistency of a melted milkshake when you're all done. And so I'm just going to give the body of the sheep a coat of the milk paint. I'm going to leave the ear black and the face and nose black and the legs black as well, just the body. So I'm going to give it one good coat. We're going to set it aside. I'm probably going to end up doing 2, maybe 3 coats depending on what happens. So I'll give this little guy his coat of paint and then we'll set it aside to dry. So I gave my sheep 2 coats of the milk paint. I set it aside to dry thoroughly in between each coat. And now, as you can see, we do have some chipping and cracking. And so I'm going to take my little finger sander and I'm going to sand off whatever is going to come off naturally, whatever is going to chip off or flake off naturally with my finger sander. Now you can see that I am getting a lot of chipping on my little sheep. And normally I do like a lot of chipping, but I think for this sheep, I'm going to give it another coat of the milk paint because I don't want so much chipping. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint the base to cover up that checkerboard look. And for that, I am using Dixie Belle chalk paint in the color Caviar. I thought it matched the legs really nicely. And so I'm going to give 2 coats of paint to the base of the sheep, and then we're going to let that completely dry. So here you can see I did give it another coat of the milk paint, and I have a little bit better coverage this time. And so now we're going to embellish this sheep with some stamps. And for that, I am using the IOD stamp Mercantile. And I just pulled off the pieces of the stamps that I wanted to use. I placed them on the sheep where I wanted to be. And now I'm just simply taking each stamp and stamping it with my black ink and then laying it down on the sheep. And when you use a stamp, it's really easy. You lay it down where you want. I like to hold it with one hand and then use my other hand to kind of rub over the entire stamped area so you get a good stamp on your project. So I'm going to do that again with the middle piece of the stamp here. I'm going to lay it down on my project, hold it with one hand in place, and then use my other hand to gently rub over the rest of the stamp so I get a nice impression on my project. So I'm going to continue to do that with the last piece of my stamp for this project. And then once that's done, we're going to let this completely dry. Now this is permanent ink, but you do want to let it dry thoroughly because if you don't, your ink will smear. One thing also to remember when you're done using your stamps, I always use a wet baby wipe and wipe off the ink immediately because you don't want it to dry on your stamps. So I love how this stamp looks on my sheep, but I don't want it to be so bright. I do want this to look more distressed. So I'm just taking my finger sander and sanding over my stamped area just to kind of distress it a little bit, dull it down just a little bit, take back some of that brightness. And I'm also going to do a quick sand over the entire body of the sheep just to make sure any of my milk paint that's going to chip off has completely chipped off before I seal it. Now it's time to seal my sheep, and my very favorite sealer to use when I'm using milk paint is the Sweet Pickins oil wax. And for this project, I'm using the Sweet Pickins dark oil wax. And so I'm just taking a sponge brush and I'm going over the entire sheep, even the legs and the base with the oil wax. And what this oil wax is going to do is not only going to seal the project, but it's going to seep into those crackles and chipped places where the milk paint chipped off, and it's going to give it a nice old vintage and distressed look. And so I'm just going to apply one coat of the oil wax. I like to set it aside for about 15 minutes after I've applied it, just to let that wax completely absorb into the paint. And then once that's done, then I will rub back the excess wax. So I let this set aside for about 15 minutes to let the wax absorb into the paint. And now I'm just taking a dry paper towel and rubbing off all the excess wax. And you can see that it's giving a beautiful matte sheen to the project, and the dark wax is also has also settled into those cracks and crevices that the milk paint left behind. So I'm going to continue to buff this back, and then once that's done, it's time to put the wheels back on. And I just took the wheels and I saved the screws, and I'm going to apply them back to the sheep. And once I have all the wheels on, this little guy is complete. For project 2, I have this Lazy Susan that I picked up at the Goodwill, and I thought it was in good shape, but I thought it was just kind of blah and boring looking. So I'm going to give this Lazy Susan a makeover, and for that I'm going to start out with Dixie Belle's chalk paint in the color Sea Glass. It's a nice kind of bluish green springy color. And so I'm going to give the Lazy Susan 2 good coats of the chalk paint just on the top. And I'm going to let it dry thoroughly in between each coat, and then once that's done, we'll move on to the next step. So I've let my Lazy Susan dry completely after 2 coats of the Sea Glass, and now I'm going to use a stamp on this. And for this, I'm using elements from the Mercantile stamp from IOD, and I just placed which pieces that I wanted on my thin mount here, and I'm taking my black ink and I'm going to ink up the entire stamp. This is a big one because I'm stamping the entire top side of the Lazy Susan. So I'm just going to take my ink pad, ink up the stamp, and then I'm going to place it where I want on my Lazy Susan. And just like any other time that I am using the stamps and the ink, I place my stamp where I want it, and then I hold it with one hand and I use my other hand to gently rub the rest of the stamped area just to make sure I get a nice inked up surface below on my project. So I'm going to continue to do that, get this first piece on, and then I have another piece that I want to stamp on the bottom of the Lazy Susan. So here you see me inking up my very last stamp that I want to put on the Lazy Susan. And so I just put it on my thin mount and inked it up with my black ink, and then I'm positioning it where I want. I'm going to hold it down with one hand and gently rub over it with the other hand, and then lift up my thin mount to see the beautiful stamped impression underneath. Now it's time to seal my Lazy Susan, and for that I'm going to use a combination of Dixie Belle's clear wax and black wax. I'm going to first take my clear wax and I'm going to go over the entire surface of the Lazy Susan where I painted and stamped, and for that I'm just going to use a dry paper towel and apply the wax over the entire top of the Lazy Susan. I'm first going to get the wax on. Once I have the wax on, then I'm going to take my paper towel and buff back the excess wax until it has a nice matte sheen. And once that's done, then I'm going to take my black wax and just kind of go around the outer edge of the Lazy Susan to give it a little bit more dimension. So here I'm going to use my black wax, and I'm just going to use a small wax brush and go just around the outer edge of the Lazy Susan to give it some dimension. And then I'm going to take a dry paper towel once I have that all applied and buff it in, blend it in until it looks the way I want it to look. And then I will take my wax brush with just whatever excess wax is left on it and kind of go around the rest of the top just to kind of blend it all in until I get the exact look that I'm looking for. For project 3, I have these 3 adorable wood cutout bunnies. Now, I have had these for years and they are in some rough shape. There's some damage to them. There's some chipped paint and they are a little bit outdated. And so I'm going to give all 3 of these little bunnies a makeover. And to start with, I'm going to get rid of the ribbon and then I'm going to take my Dixie Belle White Lightning, spray the top and the back of the bunnies and just give them a really good cleaning to get all that grime and dirt and grunge off. And I'm going to do that to the front and the back of the bunnies, and then I'm going to take my mister bottle and mist water, clean water on the bunnies and wipe that off. So for this first bunny, I'm going to be using some decoupage paper on there. And before I do that, I'm going to give it a good base coat in the Dixie Belle chalk paint, the color Fluff. Whenever I use decoupage paper, I like to put a coat of white or lighter colored paint on my project underneath where the decoupage paper is going to go. And what that's going to do is it's going to help the decoupage paper really stand out. And so I've applied 2 coats of the Fluff chalk paint. I let it dry thoroughly in between. And now we're going to add the decoupage paper. And for that, I am using Dixie Belle's Vintage Wallpaper decoupage paper. And I'm just going to place it on my bunny, kind of figure out what piece I want to put on her and cut out the chunk that I'm going to use. I have my decoupage paper cut to size, and now I'm going to apply it with my Dixie Belle clear coat in the satin finish. And to do that, it's super easy. I'm just going to hold back half of the decoupage paper and apply a good coat of my satin top coat. And then I'm going to take my mister bottle and mist the back side of the decoupage paper and then smooth everything down with my brush. And I'm going to do the bottom half the same way, putting the decoupage medium on the bunny and then misting the paper. And misting the paper is going to ensure that you have little to no wrinkles in your decoupage paper. And then I'm just going to take whatever excess is on my brush and smooth out the paper. My bunny has completely dried, and now I'm just going to take my finger sander and sand around the outside of the bunny to remove the excess decoupage paper. And it's super easy to do. You just sand in a downward motion and the paper comes right off. One thing to note, you want to make sure that your decoupage paper is completely dry before you do this step, or you run the risk of tearing your paper. Now my bunny is ready for its final top coat. You want to seal in your decoupage paper and that paint, and for that I'm going to use my satin clear coat by Dixie Belle again, and I'm just going to give a nice even coat of the top coat over the entire bunny, over the top, over the sides, and over the back. And then once that's done, this little bunny project is complete. So I'm going to give both of these little bunnies each 2 good coats of chalk paint as well. And for the first one, I'm going to be using the Dixie Belle chalk paint in the color Soft Pink. And so I'm going to give this little bunny 2 good coats of paint. I'm going to paint the top, the bottom, and the sides, and then let it dry thoroughly in between each coat. This blue bunny is going to get 2 coats of paint as well, and for him I'm going to be using 2 coats of the Dixie Belle Sea Glass chalk paint. And so I'm going to give him 2 good coats, painting the top, the bottom, and the sides, and then letting it dry thoroughly in between each coat. And once that's done, then we will move on to the next step in this project. So the paint has completely dried on both of these bunnies, and now I'm going to apply a paint inlay to them. And for that, I'm going to be using the IOD brand new Spring Melody paint inlay. For each of the bunnies, I'm going to be using a contrasting and different pattern on each of them. And so for the pink little bunny, I've picked out kind of this sagey green paint inlay. And so I'm just going to cut out my chunk of inlay that I'm going to use for this little bunny, cut out the piece that I want to use, and then once that's cut out, I'm going to figure out where I want it placed on my bunny. Now, normally I will use paint to apply a paint inlay, but for this project, I am going to use a clear coat, and for that, I'm going to use my Dixie Belle Satin Clear Coat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a healthy coat of the clear coat over the entire top of my bunny. And then once I have the clear coat on my bunny before it dries, then I'm going to take my paint inlay piece that I cut out, and I'm going to take my mister bottle and spritz the paint side of the inlay just to start activating that paint on the inlay. Once I have that spritzed, I'm going to lay the inlay down on my bunny where I want it to go. And it's super easy to do. You just lay it down and then just kind of use your fingers to smooth it out. Then I'm going to take my mister bottle, mist it again just a little bit, and then I'm going to take a dry paper towel and press down on my inlay, making sure that the inlay makes contact with the clear coat below. I'm going to give it one more spritz and then dab up any excess water and then set this aside to dry. Now I'm going to do the exact same process with my other bunny. I'm finding the piece of inlay that I want to put on this little bunny. I'm going to cut it out, and then once I have it cut out, I'm going to take my clear coat, I'm going to put a good coat of clear coat on my bunny, and I'm going to take my piece of inlay that I cut out, and I'm going to use my mister bottle and spritz the paint side of the inlay. And then while the clear coat is still wet, you want to make sure your clear coat is wet, I'm going to lay my inlay down, paint side down on my bunny in the clear coat. I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to spritz it with my mister bottle, press it down with my dry paper towel, spritz it one more time, and then dab up any excess water and set it aside to dry. So the paint inlays are dry on both my bunnies. You can see that they kind of have an opaque look and they are dry to the touch. So I'm just going to take my mister bottle again, spritz over the inlay, take a dry paper towel and dab up any excess water that's on the inlay, and then start slowly peeling back from one side to the other. Now I'm going to do the exact same process on the other bunny. I'm going to take my mister bottle, mist the inlay, take my dry paper towel, dab up any excess water, and slowly peel my inlay back. And look at how adorable that looks. Now both the paint and the inlays on these little bunnies need to be sealed up. And for that, I'm going to be sealing it with Dixie Belle's Best Staying Wax in the color white. And I'm just going to take a dry paper towel and apply my wax over the entire bunny, on the top, on the bottom, and on the sides. And once I get that on there, then I'm going to take my paper towel and buff back the excess wax until I get the look that I'm looking for both the bunnies. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and I hope I've inspired you to upcycle your thrifted, garage sale, and old home decor, because it's so much fun to turn it into something more current and more your style. Let me know in the comments what was your favorite project in today's video. And just so you know, all the products I used in today's projects are available on my website at thevintagehenandchick.com. I'll be back next week with another video, and I hope to see you then. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.